Welcome, everyone, to the Solid Responder Podcast, where we share stories from first responders and talk about the past, the present, and the future in disaster response. Solid Responder highlights key issues in emergency response, exploring, engaging, and educating the emergency response community with featured guests from diverse all-hazard emergency response disciplines. Listen in as leading experts in the field tell their personal stories of dramatic and dangerous moments, the lessons that they learned, and how their skills and leadership were put to the test. Listen in as we talk about taking good medicine to bad places. I'm your host, Joe Hernandez, and the Solid Responder Podcast, squared away, right away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Solid Responder Podcast. Thank you for tuning into the show again, and if it's your first time, welcome. I'm your host, Joe Hernandez. As we continue to grow together, we hope you will share our talks with friends and family. And don't forget to leave feedback and request topics for future episodes. Today's episode is powerful and different. We are celebrating EMS Week, which marks the 50th anniversary of National EMS Week. The motto, honoring our past, forging our future, encapsulates this momentous occasion perfectly. This week, we will recognize the incredible contributions of emergency medical services professionals and express our deepest gratitude for their life-saving work. In the spirit of honoring our past for a healthy future, today's podcast features discussions on the importance of mental health for first responders and disaster survivors. We aim to shed light on the challenges faced by EMS personnel and others and explore strategies to support their mental and emotional well-being. We are blessed to have been invited Father Constantine Millard Shepherd, who is constantly a priest in the Greek Orthodox Church and serves a small mission parish in Jacksonville, North Carolina. He is a retired 30-year career enforcement officer from one of the largest sheriff's offices in North Carolina, and he is active in a regional CIS team in North Carolina and serving as a first responder chaplain. During his law enforcement career, he recognized the need for first responders to take care of themselves, not only physically, but also mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. He holds a master's degree in pastoral care and counseling, and he has received training in multiple critical incident stress management, as well as assist and safe talk suicide prevention training. He is a certified instructor for Safe Talk program and mental first aid health. So let's start with the past, the beginning. First responders often deal with personal childhood adversities. Some say the profession attracts individuals who are on a mission to save everyone, perhaps even themselves. Research shows that first responders are among the most vulnerable populations. Is it possible that personal childhood adversity affects our responders' mental health? Does this make them more susceptible to job-related PTSD because of what they do and what they see? With job-related PTSD development after exposure to traumatic events on the job, are there similarities for individuals who have either escaped or fell victim to the background of childhood adversity while experiencing abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction? Can we be dealing with completely different individuals on the same crew, on the same overwhelming scene, now bringing home different vulnerabilities of job-related trauma with possible psychosocial effects on their fitness for duty? Father Constantine, how do first responders deal with personal childhood adversity, and does this make them more vulnerable to the job-related phrase, what we call PTSD?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about first responder mental health. It's such an important and often overlooked topic. I think you have to look at when we're looking at first responders and anyone who's been through adversity in their childhood or even traumatic incidents in their childhood, it all depends on what they do with it and how they receive it. And sometimes it's what resources they have, what type of support systems they have in place. So to say, we can say something blanket about every individual, but what happens is sometimes those adverse adversities that they may go through in childhood doesn't necessarily make them more susceptible, but may help them to be better prepared because they have those life experiences and they've gone through those things and they have developed coping mechanisms, healthy coping mechanisms, and it helps them in the context of dealing with the sensory things that they have to deal with in their jobs. Oftentimes, people who have been through sort of adversity before can handle additional adversity better than those who have never been. Their skin's a little bit tougher, so to speak. But also it also depends on the resources they had and what coping skills they develop. Now, if they develop, not good coping skills, let's say, but inappropriate coping skills, they could get them through a certain amount of time, but then in the long run, it would leave them more vulnerable. So I think it's very dependent on the person themselves and the background and resources they have to deal with adversity.
Thank you. Excellent. First responders often face significant mental health challenges due to the nature of their work. It's obvious. After listening to many individuals during long deployments, I was asked at one time, is it possible that codependency or even empathy, both driving factors for many of them who choose the profession, add to that vulnerability? And I know you just spoke about both the strength and the vulnerability of these driving factors. Are there coping mechanisms that they can adapt that are correct?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things we talk about in mental health training for first responders and in critical incident stress management. But also in the more recent development of peer support. And because what happens is everyone has a story to tell and everybody goes through certain experiences and they need to be able to share their stories. And not only to share their stories, but oftentimes make sense of those stories. And when we have those stories, in our heads, and sometimes with no one to talk to, they're there. But when we can vocalize those stories and talk to someone who understands or who gets it, so to speak, if we can bring those stories to the forefront, it actually moves it to a different part of your brain to help you process it. And oftentimes saying things out loud and having that conversation with someone who understands can actually help prevent long-term effects and lessen negative effects. So that's a good coping skill. And there's also other, getting proper rest, getting proper hydration, all those things, diet and exercise, all those things are healthy coping mechanisms. But one of the main things that I've learned and express and try to implement is that it's sort of always good to have someone as a good mentor or a friend of mine who was a chaplain in Santa Barbara in the sheriff's office in fire. His name was Father John Stephen Hedges. He told me, sometimes you just got to have someone that you can emotionally ball it on, someone who gets it. And it has to be someone who has some shared experience. He once again, he quoted, said, someone who's felt the dragon's breath. It has to, you can't just unload to someone who has no clue about the experience you have, because you could end up traumatizing them. So what happens is that peer support is really coming to the tag because of people who understand what you're going through situationally and can allow you. And sometimes you don't have to say anything. You can just listen to the person and let them vocalize and get their story out. So those are some of the main coping mechanisms that I think are important for first responder.
Thank you for sharing that. And there were some really important points that you pointed out there. Because of being there, having done that, and having listened to those, just listening to those individuals goes a long way. And the importance, I love hearing you on the fact of it really transcends and really bridges the gap of those that have never been through these events and are now listening to them for the first time from a responder. And like you just said, possibly putting them back into counseling themselves as opposed to being a counselor just not prepared for it. Phenomenal. Well, we know that first responders are critical incident stress. They're used to it with routine calls that end shortly. They're followed by a short time of relaxation, going back into the unit, going back to the station. But what is extended critical incident stress, and how do we address that? These particular events don't happen very often, and they don't end in a short period of time. They usually last from several hours to several days. We look at the recent Surfside building collapse in 2021. Responders there were sent on a 7-day mission, working 12-hour shifts, only to be told that lodging and meals would be provided in the view of the collapsed building. Father Constantine, can you explain the difference between critical incident stress and extended critical incident stress, and how events, long-term events like the Surfside building collapse, affect these responders?
Yeah, when you look at critical incident stress, it's any stress that comes about through the incident, which is sort of self-defining, I know. But what happens is, if you're sort of most people are sort of at this level here in society, and first responders sort of move in this field up here, and sort of that hypervigilance. And you talked about the short critical incident stress, where the short thing's been going back to the station, there's usually a break. But there's also that when that break happens, most people go from this level here, instead of going back to baseline, sometimes have a tendency to go here for their bodies to recover. And sort of, it takes sometimes maybe 24 hours, 48 hours to get back up to normal level. So if you have something like the incident you described, you're staying up here in hypervigilance, because you can never relax and get out here, and you can get a baseline out and come back up to the middle. So those extended situations, and you have to think about that logistically. We have to learn, I think I say we as first responders and administrators and so on and so forth, have to recognize mental health, and have to recognize stress and critical incident stress, especially when we're talking about our logistics, when we're thinking about, okay, how do we do this job? We look at all the safety things, as far as, do we have the right PPEs? Do we have safety officers? Make sure all the physical safety. Are we coming back and deconning and all that kind of stuff? Well, what are we doing? We're taking care of all the physical things, but are we taking care of the emotional, spiritual care, the psychosocial things? Because we just can't take care of one aspect of who we are as persons. We have to take care of who we are in totality of persons. And we're mind, body, and soul. We're made up of all that. So we have to take care of that and keep that in the balance. So if we have those extended periods of time where there's no downtime, if they stay up here in this hypervigilant mode, then it can have physical effects, it can have cognitive effects, emotional effects, and long-term mental health effects.
And I'm sure that the folks that miss out on some of these calls, whether they're homesick, whether they had a special event at home and took a vacation day, are affected in similar ways from those events as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because there's such we talked about before, the desire to help, the desire to be there, desire to take on those challenges. And I think most people who get involved in any first responder job, whether it be fire, law enforcement, EMS, get in there because they want to help and they want to do the right thing. These are noble professions when they're done correctly, and they mean a lot. And it's not just a job, it's more of a vocation. It becomes a part of who you are, and helps shape who you are. So oftentimes we have that feeling where, we do want to be there because you want to help your brothers, you want to take care. It's a family situation. So yeah, that can also affect people too, when they're not necessarily there, but also when they weren't there. So it can associate, especially if there's an incident where maybe, fellow responders are injured or something of that nature. Maybe that guilt response of, if I had been there, maybe this happened, or why wasn't I there? Quote unquote survival guilt. So.
Thank you. Absolutely. Okay. Support systems are crucial for maintaining the mental health for first responders. While many seek counseling for some reasons, we tend to see those who focus on saving others by choice of occupation don't always feel it's for them. Somehow they believe that what they've chosen as a career path protects them from the alterations that can leave individuals with heightened sensitivity to stress and a lower threshold for experiencing overwhelming emotions like fear and anxiety, leading to emotional dysregulation, difficulties with self-perception, and relationship issues, both physically and spiritually. Father Constantine, with your experiences and most of what you just spoke about, what resources and support networks are available to these EMS professionals and others to help them cope with the stress and trauma?
Well, I think the support systems that are in place have been over the last, especially in the last 10 years, have been getting better, I think. But I think one of the biggest things is your support system depending on the area you're in. Things like peer support. Do you have a critical incident stress debriefing teams, either in your agency or outside of your agency? Sometimes it's best to have them outside of your agency because when something happens in the agency, the people who are coming in to do the quote unquote the debriefing could be one of the people who are affected. So sometimes it's good to use teams from other outside sources. Obviously, if there's a serious crisis, the new crisis hotline 988 for suicide assistance and also for mental health crisis is available. But there's peer supports, there's the critical incident stress things, but there's also a lot of things going on about resilience training. And what you're doing is trying to learn more to be prepared as you go into a situation, so you're not overwhelmed. Because and that's where training comes in and so important. Sometimes training and education, you can never replicate things as they really are, but the better you train and the more prepared you are to react in a situation can lower those stress levels. So increased training, peer support, and also just people having the general knowledge about mental health and having those discussions and having those dialogues about, especially a concern around suicide, that was something that was never talked about, or people don't want to talk about, or are uncomfortable talking about. Those dialogues need to happen. And the more people talk about those things, the more educated they become, the less, there's always going to be stress. You can't avoid it, but these are things that'll make things less stressful and easier to work with and to maintain your mental health.
Thank you. The state of Florida received a pretty rough last 2 years with those suicides from those first responders being done at the station as opposed to at home, totally involving those other individuals around them during that time. So it's interesting how we can continue to heal from those things. Our peer-to-peer initiative discussions aim to fill the gaps of never feeling alone. With early intervention and treatment, responders can be equipped with the tools that they need to manage stress, regulate emotions, and build resilience in the face of trauma. You just heard it from Father Constantine on a lot of those ways. During the Surfside building collapse, responders every day were exposed to 3 triggers, known to have an impact on me and by many others. Those are sight, smell, and sound. Responders could hear the destruction, smell the destruction, and feel the effects of destruction, all without any extended breaks. You see, every day they went from the disaster rubble pile to their lodging quarters, which was always in harm's way. Those who worked the day shift listened to the others working throughout the night, the same for the night shift, but add the media blitz to all of that. And trying to stay fit for duty while never leaving the site for days was almost impossible for many. Father Constantine, I know that you can share firsthand accounts from disaster survivors and first responders recently here, even on Pine Island, about their experience and the importance of mental health care and seeking respite.
I think one of the things that in my experience is sometimes people have a reluctant to talk about their experiences because they compare their experiences with someone else, and they think, oh, who am I to say anything because I know this person's experience is far worse than mine. But what happens is if you keep that, they keep that inside and they never deal with their own traumatic incident or their own adversity, whether it be, sometimes it may be because I didn't go through anything, and this person over here went through something. I don't feel I have, quote unquote, the privilege to talk about it. So what happens is I believe that stories are sacred and everyone has a story, and we should all be able to tell our stories, but sometimes they hold them in for lack of a better, term. We think that our story is not as deserving as others, and who are we? I heard a wonderful quote was working, out of Pine Island was that, there was one storm, but 1,000 stories. Everybody went through the storm, but everybody, I went through Hurricane Ian. But what does that mean? Well, it means it can mean 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people, because everybody experienced the same thing, but everybody experienced it differently. And so everybody has a unique story. The other thing is, in my own law enforcement career, working, there's great advantages and also disadvantages in working in the area that you live, because, sometimes when you're driving around, you can say, oh, I remember this or remember that. And so you have those, not only sight, sounds, and smells, but you have memory, where you go by a certain place at a certain time of the year and you remember a certain thing that happened there, and you recall that. And those are things that we have to process, and they're difficult. And sometimes the best analogy is that someone gave me one time, they're like little monsters, and we stuff them in a box, and we put them, and we close the lid and we put them away. Sometimes when you're tired, or there's other things going on, or there's certain triggers, sometimes the lid comes open and the monster pops his head out of the box, and we have to deal with it, and we put it back in. But we have to learn to deal with it in an appropriate way, in a coping mechanism, things that work for us, whether it be peer support or counseling, or our faith life, and all those things have a role to play in how we deal with what we've been exposed to. The other thing is what I tell, I'm not sure if this is an appropriate place, but I always tell first responders when I'm talking to them, there is a lot of post-traumatic stress, but just because you're a first responder, sometimes people, they feel, okay, am I crazy because I don't feel like I'm stressed? No. It affects different people in different ways. So lots of times, you get the word out and people say, oh, there's a firefighter, or there's someone from EMS or law enforcement, they must have PTSD. They all have PTSD. No, it's not that way. It's different for different things. And we all have, post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress disorder is something entirely different. Also, those stressors that we go through build us. They make us better people.
Powerful.
I've talked to people who've been through storms and hurricanes. They said, I feel like I'm a better person now than I was before this disaster, because it's been tough. It's been hard. But I learned, and I saw people love each other, and I saw people come together, and now I feel, I may be battered, bruised, and scarred, but I feel that I'm a better person than I was before this event.
Powerful. And I'm so happy. And yes, it is a place. It was fantastic that you spoke about the healthy ones in our group, and we need them there. We need to be able to lean on them and be able to see the strengths and values that they have and how they've been able to cope. And like you mentioned, they've probably been able to find coping mechanisms that weren't harmful, but yet very successful in the way that they were able to turn their scenes and their scenarios into positive effect. Phenomenal. I know that you've started some incredible innovative programs and initiatives designed to improve mental health and wellness, not just in the EMS community. I've had the pleasure of meeting Father Constantine here on Pine Island. We had a tragedy after Hurricane Ian with EMS personnel having to deal on a tragic MCI, and how quick he was to respond to that, and then finding the extra Hurricane Ian event. And their organization has opened the doors for first responders, healthcare workers, law enforcement, hospital workers, daycare workers, teachers. I mean, we're all responders to some degree. And I love that they've opened the door, not just for a 4-hour class, but two-day classes to help strengthen those providers to be able to not only give, but to strengthen themselves first, as you mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about those two initiatives?
Yes. One of the things that I'm involved with is International Orthodox Christian Charities, and that is sort of the international Christian. They respond all over the world, but then we have what's called the U.S. programs, and those that we respond to disasters, both natural and man-made, here in the United States. And we have partnered in the past with the American Red Cross in Kentucky, doing some work with rebuilds. And then after Hurricane Ian, we were in talks with the American Red Cross again. They said, listen, we see this gap in services to provide psychosocial support. So we're working through a grant with the American Red Cross in the 5-county area. I think it's Lee County, Charlotte County, DeSoto, Sarasota, and one more, and I can't remember. But anyway, but we're working in those counties. And one of the things we did, we came in and offered sort of one-on-one and group psychosocial support, either debriefings or just talking to people. And we noticed, one of the things we noticed was that there were a lot of people getting a lot of help who had been affected by the storm, but the people who were helping the people weren't getting a lot of help. And those are, are your responders or your even faith leaders, clergy, social workers who were dealing with folks were not being able, they were sort of not being looked at. So we developed that gap. And then later on, we expanded. We said, okay, we can come and talk to these people, but we're not going to be here forever. It's a grant. I'm in North Carolina. People from all over the country have been coming to, so what can we do to help, it's like to help them better respond in their own communities. So we're doing training in 3 different locations. We're doing a training in May, in Venice, in Sarasota County. We're doing a training in Fort Myers and at Lee County in June, and then one in Arcadia, Florida in July. We're going to be offering 2 classes each week. I'm hoping to see lots of brother and sister first responders come.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely well needed and well deserved. Well, Father Constantine, we can't thank you enough for giving of your time and your heart to support those wanting to help and those needing help. Look forward to having you back and hearing incredible results from these IOCC programs and what the effect that they'll have on the community and responders. That's the best part. You'll be able to find out more information about the programs that Father Constantine has spoken about on our website. For our listeners, don't forget to dial back in on the Solid Responder Podcast Network for more on MedSpecOps programs and other relevant information. Our initiative aims to maintain peak fitness for ongoing service and your overall well-being. We also invite spouses and children of responders to share their stories, offering fresh perspectives and captivating narratives. Listen to previous podcasts true to the MSOC peer-to-peer initiative regarding support. If you know of someone who is affected and needs help, please seek out support. Consider attending the National Urban Search and Rescue and Medical Special Operations Conference in Orlando, Florida, November 11th through the 13th, 2024. It is a fantastic opportunity to train, discuss, and tackle some of these same issues together. Thank you all for tuning in to this podcast on the Solid Responder Network. Until next time, stay safe and take care.